Hi stars, I'm Chris Baird, Center Star, and we're here to continue with Hollow Earth. I have a little list of things to go over because last video I got a lot of distractions and phone calls, so I hope things go smoothly this time. I actually had this at the end of my list, but I know that can be a heart-wrenching symbol for a lot of people, so I want to go over it first so that we don't have any misunderstandings and misrepresentations with what I'm trying to explain here. The ancient symbol for peace, in the most part, was a swastika in this direction. All right, where the tabs seem to almost go, if you're going by the corners, in the clockwise direction, and the swastika, if you went with the tabs, they would go in a counterclockwise direction. All right, not all of them. Some of the ancient Hindu peace symbols had this pinwheel, and they had little dots in between, okay? But for the most part, the ancient peace symbols were reversed. And in a future video, we will be going over the Nazis and Admiral Byrd and the fight over the South Pole. But just for now, I wanted to explain this basic concept that you had the peace symbol of inner earth and ancient druids who ended up later on becoming the Germans, etc. And then you had the swastika, which was a representation of what a lot of people think is Hitler was out doing a lot of body sizing and stuff like that. He was looking for anybody that might have a Lemurian or Atlantean Hollow Earth connection. And his representation of the swastika was to say, hey, we're the outside brothers. We're going to clean up the world. We're going to make world peace and have world peace after this. I mean, in his twisted brain, he thought getting rid of everything that was defunct and not good could eventually make it to where he could make a pure race that could reunite with people in the Hollow Earth. Now, I don't agree with what Hitler did at all. I don't. I think what he did was disgusting. I think we could get world peace without having to get rid of all of the people with issues and problems and all of that. But in his twisted way of thinking, again, either he may have thought that or that was part of their agenda according to a lot of people. So let's get into the other parts of this. The reason I bring this up is there's a really interesting picture with Olaf Jansen in front of a big giant, which I'll talk about a little later, and behind him on the wall is one of these ancient peace symbols in that drawing that shows the lands of the inner earth. Like it shows water and if I remember, like grains and stuff like that. All the pieces and parts that create a world behind this king's throne on the wall. So, you know, when you look for the illustrations on that, you'll be able to find that. And I think I'm going to try to picture that in the thumbnail today. So what I wanted to talk about is seasons. When Olaf Jansen entered this hole, the external sun was right here, heading back north again, okay? And because of the tilt of the crust, of course the sun wasn't going anywhere, the Earth's crust was tilting towards the sun more in the North Pole. And what that did, okay, is it made it to where the sun was about this angle right here, okay? And we had this deal right here, okay, with day and night. So when he first entered the top of the North Polar opening, he saw a 24-hour sun in the sky, and as he got further down and he landed here, he still only saw a 24-hour sun in the sky. I didn't explain that very well. It was when he got much further down here that he started seeing the day and night of the inner sun. And that's because what creates the day and night there is this stays in proportion to the sun outside, wherever the sun angle is compared to the crust. And it's the crust revolving around, okay, that causes day and night inside of the Earth. And depending on the season, that's what this angle is going to be. So that's what creates their seasons in there. So at the North Pole, when we're having our winter, they're having summer at their North Pole in there, okay? Everything is backwards inside the Hollow Earth. It's, you know, everything is the opposite. And every mythology says that. They said The underworld is the opposite of the upper world. So people took that to the extreme of saying, this is the land of the living, so this must be the land of the dead. But that part isn't true. That part is not an opposite. There are living beings inside the hollow earth. So if we're having a North Pole summer and we go down, then we have this deal. Okay? And this would be daylight and this would be nighttime, and they would be having their supposed winter, colder temperatures up here. Okay? And then they would have the opposite down here. And during this time, with these cooler temperatures, cold air would be venting out and warm air would be rushing in. And it's the opposite when you have the warm air here and the cold air outside, cold air coming in during the time that the sun angle's down here. So it's intaking rather than expelling. Do you understand what I'm saying? So when it's daytime here, it's pulling in cold air. And when it's nighttime here during the winter, it's pushing. When it's nighttime here, it's pushing out cold air, and when it's daytime here, it's pulling in cold air. And that was part of that flow chart that I showed you in one of the last lessons. Man, I keep hitting it. That's like another video now. Okay, so another thing I wanted to go over was Stefan Sindoni. Last time I told you about the inner center star a little bit, and I told you a little bit about the polar vortex that went down to the poles. And I knew there was a secondary vortex because I could see, again, there was a low-level vortex of clouds, but I could see another vortex shooting all the way up and deforming in space, at least over the Baffin Bay pole hole, okay, where our magnetic field seems to emit from. I could see deformations at the edge of space where instead of being perfectly round, you could see these blurs and blips where this polar vortex was reaching up. And it was through a conversation with Stefan Sindoni that we got to talking about magnetism and air conditioning units, and that's when I came up with the secondary vortex does reach the top of the poles from the bottom and the top and cools it all the way through. And later on, I do plan on drawing a semi-model of that, and we'll get into that more. Stefan Sindoni was a key in a lot of my research. He was the one that actually narrated Olaf Jansen's story in part. And, you know, that's how I met him. And I started asking him if he thought this was real. So I just wanted to give him a shout out, Stefan Sindoni. All right. And so let's continue with Olaf's journey. The last time we said he was at a river, all right, at the head of the land, after traveling inside. Well, while they were at that river and they were gathering nuts, berries, and stuff like that, they heard thundering voices. And as these voices came closer, a giant ship under its own propulsion, and we're talking in, 1829, so on the outside of the earth, they're using sailing with wind, all right? The ship under its own propulsion pulls up, stops. They later learned this is a cruising vessel, a pleasure cruiser, and there's big, huge giants on there. I mean, these guys are freaking out. They're like, what the heck? There's giants. They're twice as tall as they are. And they symbol them, would you come with us? They seem very excited. And so Olaf and his dad said, hey, we're here, son. You wanted to come here? Let's go. So they hoisted Olaf and his father's entire vessel and put it on the foredeck of the ship, and everybody was checking it out, and they traveled up that river. And that's when they started noticing the day and the night on the sun. And they came to a land where they were taken by the captain or one of the people on there and lived with their family for a year, learning the languages inside of the earth. In the meantime, their vessel was taken to a museum, and people were coming from all over the inner earth to see the vessel of Jans, 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 and Olaf Jansen. So they learn the language, and he says, he talks about the incredible size of the fruit. Grapes as big as your fist, tomatoes and pumpkins as big as your head, apples as big as your head. Grapes as big as your fist, apples as big as your head, pumpkins as big as your entire body, you know, were the typical norm. And the animals too, just gigantic and ginormous. And they're only living about right here inside the hollow earth. But then they say, hey, we want to see the rest of this place, you know. And they ask about the inner sun, and they say it's the smoky God, but we also call it the throne of God. You know, we think that's where God lives. So, to me, I don't know if there could be a hollow opening in the center star going all the way through and a possible cool city inside of here. I haven't given that a lot of thought. I don't think so. I think there's so much metal. But that's what they said it was, the throne of God. Okay? And so, so they're living here, and they want to travel the inside of the earth. Well, they have to get permission from the king of the inside of the earth. So, they travel further south, but they're still traveling north by compass, because this is the North Pole right here. And so they travel further north, and they end up in a city called Edon. Eden. Eden. E-D-O-N, E-D-I-N, E-D-E-N, all one and the same. Now, remember that Olaf is telling this story on his deathbed, and we still have an author writing this biography for him, and he may have taken some liberties in this. But I've found other information where Edon could be a real place inside of the earth. And what they describe is this gigantic fountain coming out of the center of the city, an aquifer fountain where water from the surface comes out into this magnificent fountain. And it feeds 4 rivers. 4 rivers that flow to different parts of the land. See? Just like the peace symbol, kind of. In this garden, there is a peace swastika sort of thing that divides the waters that are flowing out of this giant fountain into these culverts that start going. And 2 of them flow to the southwest and southeast, which would be the northwest and northeast in there, and in the opposite direction on the other side. And due to centrifugal force, they climb up and then they flow out. They climb up and then they flow out. All right? So that's how the aquifer works. Water from the surface drains out, comes out in springs due to the extra gravity of the center star, but then due to the gravity of the crust, it just falls, short right there. I mean, it's not like it comes out a lot, but this one particular fountain feeds most of the water for the entire inner earth. And I will get into that in the future when we could talk about the Great Flood and how that occurred. And what I also wanted to mention is the ice pack and flow. As this water's coming out and it gets to winter time, it's starting to freeze and pack ice over the top of the Arctic. All right? So you got pack ice coming out, filling it up, and blocking this off. So during the winter here, this is untravelable. It's completely blocked off by ice, and vice versa. When it's summer here, this is completely blocked and untravelable. It's blocked. All right? So when Olaf gets here, he sees something. First off, let's say that he's this tall, and the giants he met at the North Pole were this tall. The giants that he met in Edon were that tall. 3 times as tall as what he was. So he was 6 foot, these guys were 12 foot, and these guys were 18 feet on average. And they still weren't all the way to the exact center of the crust. They were pretty close, but they weren't exactly close. And there's a lot of people that speculate under Missouri, where they have the arch, is actually where Edon rests, under North America. Okay? I don't know where that information comes from, but I've heard it from other Hollow Earth researchers that under the city of Missouri is where the land of Edon is, inside the Hollow Earth. All right? And that's where he meets this king who's sitting on this mighty throne with the ancient peace symbol representing the Garden of Eden that feeds the 4 rivers, which the author writes as the 4 biblical rivers of the Bible. And then if you look at it from that direction, you would have all of these lands inside the earth, the land of Nod and all of these things, the east of Eden and all of these biblical references, all right? And when we think about it in a biblical sense, that's what I set out to do at first, was to prove the Bible. When I had heard that there were giants inside the earth in the beginning of the story of Noah, that excited me. There were giants in the earth in those days and after. My brain hadn't put together that when they're talking in earth, they're talking hollow earth, okay? Not yet. But eventually I realized every time they say in or under, they were talking about hollow earth, and face, they were talking about the outside. Not everything in the Bible is true, but it's true in the different, when you put a different light to it and the full understanding to it. There are a lot of truths and similarities in the Bible to what's really going on. Adam and Eve, or you could say Adapa in the Sumerians, were cast out of the earth. All right. Adapa in the Sumerians was taken to Nibiru after he was the first created human by the Anunnaki sleeping with the human slaves they created. He was taken to Nibiru and he was not allowed to eat any of the fruit from there because he might have long-lasting life. None of the food from there. He was fed slave food. In the story of Adam and Eve, they weren't allowed to eat of a certain tree, of the tree of knowledge and everlasting life. They ate off the tree of knowledge, and then they were cast out of the earth. Abel, when he slays Cain, he's cast back into earth, and he's afraid everywhere he goes, the people inside are going to kill him. All right? Adam and Eve started out at 1,000 years old. They slowly diminished in age down to the human 100, which is the norm for people underneath the radiation of the sun outside, decaying their bodies. So we're talking about 2 different things, but the Sumerian tablets getting older, being older than that, and I'll get into that in future part of this series as well, when I get into the Anunnaki Giants that are different than the Hollow Earth Giants. The Hollow Earth Giants have 5 fingers, have 5 toes, and they are human. But the Anunnaki had 6 fingers and 6 toes, and they were much different. They were much heavier, much more sturdy, and strong than what the humans were. So he gets there, he gets permission to travel. They travel all around on this like monorail system, okay? And they weren't used to a monorail system. Those weren't around until just about the time he died in the early 1900s, train systems and a future world monorail system. So we're still talking 1829. They had their own city lights that they didn't have to feed gas to. They had electricity, which was barely coming out on the outside of the world. It was abundant everywhere. Every day, it rained like clockwork. So they had at least one room in the house with an open roof so that they could just take a shower every day by the rain clockwork of water condensing just before nightfall and falling from the air, creating a shower that they could use every day. They used nature. They lived in nature. They had not destroyed the Eden, the garden inside the earth. It's a beautiful place in there. I would love to see it. Am I going to travel to a cave and try to hike 200 miles in? No. Am I going to go towards the poles? No, because they're outlawed and monitored. I'd be blown out of the water. If I'm invited in there, if a ship pulled up today and I saw that they were the people of Asgard, they carried the emblem, the reverse peace symbol on their craft, yeah, I would probably go. Honestly, as long as my kids could go, and I was able to let my family know where I was going when I'd be back, I'd be cool with it. I'd love to see it. Hopefully that's something that will happen one day. So after that, they need to get home, and it's right around that same September time. Okay, so it had just started, the sun had just started to go away from the South Pole, but it was still melted down there. So when it's melted, in a picture I found at the Museum of Nature and Science, Denver Museum of Nature and Science in Denver, which I'll get into later, and I might include in this picture. I got a couple pictures, and that was on April 23rd, 2011, and it showed splits in the ice sheet with water coming out at that time, and there wasn't all the sea ice in that representation, so I could tell that was South Pole summer, and it had the polar opening in it. which is really what got me kick-started on believing this, was when I found that actual imagery, which they have since changed at that museum, but it was NASA imagery that didn't cover this hole, which I collaborated with another NASA video that was copied and put out that shows the air and the aurora coming out of a small hole in the pole. So this hole is jagged inland, but there's also cracks in the ice sheet, and you can actually travel through those cracks and through here, through certain spots where in the summer it's melted and it's not land. And that's what they did. Unfortunately, their ship was capsized. Olaf was rescued off of an iceberg by a whaler, charged by, I think it was Angus McPherson. He goes home, finds out his mother's dead. His lands have been confiscated by his uncle. His uncle wants to give him back, but his uncle hears a story, has him read it in front of 2 constables, and he spends 27 years in an insane asylum. And even when he told Angus McPherson his story, he was locked in the brig until he was not delirious anymore. So that's the story of Olaf Jansen. That gets us further into the Hollow Earth. Thank you, stars. If you could like and subscribe. In the next one, we're going to be talking more about my museum picture. We're going to be talking more about other pictures that I've gotten since then. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about the Americans and the Nazis, pre-World War II, pre-World War I era, and beyond, and what's going on down here at the South Pole. So look forward to that. Again, like, subscribe, share, and we'll see you next time. Peace.